So just for the recording purposes, I'm going to repeat that I'm Judith Girmaldi, and that we're here today to learn about getting your legal house in order. And we're going to spend about an hour going through this. So here we go. So it's time to start planning. Why? Why do we have to start planning? Because our lives are complicated. And you finally have the time to think about it. I was talking to someone, they said, I have to think things through. I'm not ready to do this yet. So this is the beginning of your thinking process, okay? So your goal, I would have said 5:55. 5:55 is the time to start. I have a feeling most of us in the room are past 55. So let's say today is the time to start. Okay, and why? What did you do with that? We're going to change the 55 to 65. It's because you don't have child care burdens, although some grandparents would disagree with me. They're pretty busy. But you have time. You have time to plan, and your needs have changed. I think the reality that time is getting shorter, that we really have to get our legal house in order. Our health issues, which used to be like, oh, I don't have to think about that. Now you think about it a lot. And your work life is over, or those of you who still may be working part-time, it's pretty stable. And so it's just really time to start. You'd be surprised if you haven't started, you're not alone. So I ask people, why don't you do it? And many people say, well, I did it. I took care of it a long time ago. If you're telling me you took care of it a long time ago, I will tell you that maybe some of the things in your life have changed. Like, you have great-grandchildren now, they're my grandchildren. People got married, people got divorced, moved. So there's changes that, even if you did it a long time ago, you should revisit. You're saying, I'm going to do it this year. Okay, I'm going to hold you to it. This year is the year. But some people say, it's not important. I have nothing. I don't have anything. You have something. And even if it's just your favorite. I have a locket that I was given by my grandmother, and it has a picture of my grandfather in it. And so maybe that's all, but it was very precious to me to receive that. So everybody has something. And I have had families argue over binoculars. You say, what? But Papa was an avid bird watcher. And so every morning he got up, looked out the window with the binoculars, and identified the birds. So the two daughters said, I want those binoculars. No, I want those binoculars. So they weren't precious, valuable, but they were precious with sentiment. So those are the kind of things that you may have, even if you don't have riches. And then some people say, I'm just clueless. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I don't even know where to begin. So that's what today is about. We're going to tell you where to begin. So let's move on. So if you haven't done anything, you have company. 55% of Americans have no wills. So we lawyers kind of love that, because now there's complicated estates and we can make a lot of money. You don't want us to make money. Let's plan so you can put me out of business. 41% of us have no living wills. And a living will is about health. And if COVID taught us anything, there's a lot of health issues that we couldn't help people when they were in the hospitals. There was no instructions. About 39% of us don't have health care processes. And that's appointing a person to make medical. So only 40% think about estate planning. So why not? Why don't people do it? And why should they? Well, there's few changes ahead. Right now, there's a lot of people who have dementia. You probably have seen it in this century. Some of your friends started out fine, and after a year or two, you start to notice something's up. Dementia is, one of the gifts of old age, living to 90s, is forgetfulness. Some cognitive impairment does enter into our reality. So we need to kind of get ourselves ready for that eventuality. It won't happen to all of us, but there's about 1 in 9 people will have some form of dementia. So let's get down to the challenge of getting ready for having a successful later years. Many of you have grandchildren who are going off to college for the first time. Talk to your children and say, you should have a healthcare proxy for that boy, and maybe even a power of attorney, because he gets into some medical treatment, gets in a car accident up in Albany or Binghamton, and you won't be able to make decisions if he's over 18. He's a man. He's an independent man. And even though you're paying all the bills, you don't have any right. So it's not just documents for us, although because of our health and our possible medical issues, but everyone can get hit by that car as you walk out the door. So spread the word to your family, especially to those young adults who are going off to college and are not so good at making some decisions. Some of those parents, I had she was my secretary, and she got a call. Her son was off in college, and he fell downstairs, probably at a frat party, probably a little alcohol in the process, and he had a serious head injury. And she could do nothing. She ended up having to go get a guardianship for him. So, please, think about it. So these are documents for us. We all want to be prepared. We don't want to be subject. We don't want to be Britney Spears. But it's for everyone. Okay. So you might say, my grandmother nobody ever had to do these things. Why do I have to do them? Well, one reason is our families aren't as simple as they used to be. Remember? There's I'm an example. Mother's Day for me is very complicated. I spend one here. They're all, there's blended families, there's 6 grandmothers, there's not just 2. So, because of the marriages and remarriages, so families aren't as simple. Kinship isn't. And those of us who are single, who have no children, our family is kind of spread over nieces and nephews, and so it gets complicated. And sometimes we don't have all our assets in Brooklyn. We have that little bungalow in the Poconos, or some of us have snowbird apartments in warmer climates, or maybe back in Hong Kong. I mean, our land is all over, and so there's 50 states with 50 different rules, so being prepared when you have multiple issues. The other thing is, we have these retirement accounts, which our past generations didn't have. We had IRAs before, 401ks, or annuities. So our life is a little bit more complicated. And when we don't plan, we may end up, your family may end up spending money later, wasting money to get at assets because we really didn't plan. And think about the stress you put on your families or those who are trying to handle your affairs while you're sick or there's a crisis. It's so much better to do it now, put a plan in place now when things are calm. So I advise you to kind of think about it. What did I do?
Control 0.
Excuse me?
Control 0.
Control.
The number 0. Control and the number 0.
I thought I was in the number.
On the top.
Is the last will and testament. So what is the last? It's a written statement that says, this is what I want to happen with my stuff. So, and that's kind of a traditional document. It must be written. In New York State, there's no such thing as a spoken will. It has to be a written document. It has to name an executor. It doesn't have to outline your assets. It doesn't have to say, this asset goes here, this asset goes here. It just says, all of my assets shall be distributed as, and you can say to my spouse, if not my spouse, to my children in equal shares, if no children, to their children, or my favorite niece. You can outline a plan of how you want your assets to go. Linda said, what if I just put transfer on death or payable on death on my accounts? will the will still govern this? And the answer is no. Assets that have designations, your IRA maybe has a designation, your life insurance has a designation. The will only governs assets that are solely in your name and that do not have a designation. So sometimes the will seems irrelevant. What do I need it if I put all these transfer on death designations? Well, it is the only way to transfer a house. A house you can't put oh, I take that back. There's a new law passed April that you can now put a transfer on death on your deed, but I don't think it's effective yet. So wills used to be the only way you could talk about real estate. When there's an executor, they get to be the boss. Now, hopefully they're a gracious, warm-hearted, inclusive boss, but they're the boss. So my sister, whose nickname was the boss, became the executor. She got the job done and solved that problem of diverse power. So, so the will appoints an executor can be much more descriptive and can really just be more inclusive.
Hi, Susan.
Hello, how are you?
So,
The boss is,
when you're choosing the executor, as I'll go back to my Italian roots, an older son should be the executor, right? Well, tradition might say that. Maybe cultural directives might say that, but they're not always the best administrator. So you really should pick someone who likes paperwork, is not afraid of detail, and will get the job done. You've heard about estates that go on for years. Why? Why do you think that happens? Well, court has something to do with it. It could take a year. But sometimes it's an ineffective princely executor or princess executor just can't get the job done. So pick wisely. Remember, family disputes could be settled by the black and white words of a will. So I've often had, Grandma told me I could have her dining room set. Well, I never heard that. I never heard Grandma say that. She said that. And I get the painting over the couch. But if you have it in your will, there's no disputing. I don't know if you've ever had those stories happen in your family. And sometimes they're silly, they're not, but it's emotional. It's, I don't want to give Grandma up. So if I can keep this going, maybe it's not really over. So sometimes it's I don't want to end. And sometimes it's greed, and sometimes it's, I was the favorite, and so a little cuts away all that promises, it's not written, it's not real, okay? If you say, what if I never wrote a will, what happens? The state wrote a will for every single one of us. There's a will for you on the New York law. It follows pure bloodlines. And it's pretty simple when you're married with 2 children. Because even if you never wrote a will, the state's law would say 50% goes to your spouse and the other 50% is divided among your children. And you might have a very grumpy spouse. Wait a minute, I'm going 100%? Nope. If you don't write a will, the children have equal rights. Children generally, if you wrote a will and said, I give all to my spouse, none to my children, they're just going to have to wait for their father to die. Or worse, they're going to have to wait till the second husband, who is not their father, dies. So, if that's true, children say, I object. But children have no natural rights to assets in an estate. A spouse does. So if I wrote a will and said I give everything to my sons and nothing to my spouse has what's called a right of election. It's the right to 1/3 of your estate or $50,000, whichever is greater. So, So if they're blended or second marriages can become problematic because that spouse, even if they're married for 3 weeks, would have that statutory right to 1/3 of the estate. Now you might say, well, I'm gonna give my new spouse all of my IRAs and I'm gonna give the kids the house. And that might work out to be 1/3, 2/3, it might. But if you don't have an asset to hand to the new spouse, you might have some grumpy kids on your hand. So those are the things that a will can make clear what you wish, and it's better than intestacy, which we give the spouse immediately 50%. Often have families who say, I make them draw a family tree, and I say, okay, you're saying you have no children, so it would go to your brothers and sisters. I haven't seen my brother in 45 years. I don't even know where he is. Well, he's your natural blood heir. He's the next of kin. We have to find him, send him a copy of the will, and he has to say, no problem, I have no objections to this will. Go forward and distribute as the will says. But if the brother says, whoa, I didn't know my sister had all that money, maybe he'll show up. Now, clearly the will says you don't get anything, brother, but you still have a right to know you're not getting anything. And you have about a hiatus time, 6 to 8 weeks, either put up or show up. Either sign and say, no problem, or show up in court and say why that will should be overturned. It's really hard to overturn a will. The only basis for overturning a will is you weren't of sound mind, you weren't over 18, or somebody unduly influenced you. Or the will was flawed, you didn't have witnesses, it wasn't dated, something like that. But if there were undue influence, what's undue influence? Well, the cleaning lady who, in the last 3 years of your life, convinced you to give her the house because she helped you so much. Well, that would be undue influence because she had a confidential relationship with you and she had the opportunity to influence you. So brother could come from Colorado, show up and say, no cleaning lady is getting the family house, even though he hadn't done anything, he hadn't paid anything. So that's a will contest. That's ugly. So that's why sometimes when people have complicated families or they know there's a nut in your family tree, that they're going to make trouble even if there's no trouble to be made. Or sadly, if you have a disabled heir who really needs the money and can't afford to wait for 6 months, 9 months, 1 year for an estate to settle. Or if an heir shouldn't get money, it's dangerous. They have addiction problems or gambling problems. Those might be reasons why you want to avoid probate. Because it's going to be costly and long and problematic. And so what's the solution? We talked about this already. There's some solutions. This is an idea. Let me put a beneficiary designation on everything. I don't need a will. A trust is another solution. So we'll talk about some of those.
When my sister was married, she was separated from her husband and she set up IRAs, 3 of them in trust for her children. Then a law went into effect, which she wasn't aware of, that the husband had to sign off that those children, yes, they would get those IRAs when she passed. But she married for the second time. She married for the second time, and that husband, he had me in court for 11 years, and he took all their children's IRAs.
So there is a law.
So the people need to know to go back over their own documents on who they put in as beneficiaries and renew it.
Or don't get married.
Or don't get married again.
Don't get remarried. There is a law that governs IRA. It's called ERISA, ERISA. You may have heard
I
that.
couldn't believe he did that.
Yeah, and it says when you do not name a spouse as the recipient of your qualified retirement plans, an IRA, a 401k, a 457 plan, one of those government-based plans, you must get your spouse to sign a waiver. There is a relatively new law, and I didn't think it was grandfathered in on past, but if he was a spouse during the period where ERISA was in place and he didn't waive his right, he could override it, yes. And it's based on the fact that, and it really was to favor women mostly, because at the time, mostly men had retirement and pension plans, and the women would say, well, I sent you to work every day, even though I didn't have a plan. You had breakfast, you had a clean shirt, you had the house in order, so I got a piece of that action, even though I didn't put any dollars in it. And you can also see that it's called equitable distribution, so it's based on trying to make equity between the two spouses. Then when we women said, we're as equal as they are, so they applied the law to both women and men. So any spouse whose spouse has an IRA and you choose to name a non-spouse as beneficiary, they have to waive their right. Said, okay, you put 1,000 or 1,400 into a trust. They would say, okay, we're going to look back 5 years and we'll see how many gifts you gave. And they only find gifts that total $1,400. That's what you put in the trust, which is stupid. No, $140,000 you put in the trust. Then Medicaid would say you have a 10-month wait before you will get Medicaid when you apply. So the amount you put in is how they calculate how long you wait. So look at
It's
this
different than it was.
Yeah, the number keeps raising every year, cost of living, but the 5-year look back has remained the same. I want to just alert you, and next month we're doing a talk all about retirement accounts. But I just want to give you a little taste about retirement accounts. It used to be not a big deal, but many of you have had retirement accounts since early working years, and they're kind of large, and they've been growing. And now at 73, Uncle Sam says you have to start taking money out. And you say, I don't really need it yet. Can I wait? Nope. Because Uncle Sam said, we let you defer the money you put in. We didn't tax you on it. It's been growing on your nickel and Uncle Sam's nickel. Only it's more like Uncle Sam's 25% and your 75%. He's waiting for his 25%. You know, it used to be you had to wait till 70. It's grown. You get to hold on to it till 73. When you take that money out, it gets taxed. So it's called the required minimum distribution, or RMD. And you're all probably getting asked now by your bank, so the IRA custodian, you're going to be taking it. Where do you want it to go? It's going to push me up. It's going to make my Medicare payment higher. It's going to change my tax rate. There's very little avoidance that you can do. But so you need to be aware. And it's a valuable asset. You need to know that you have to name beneficiaries, like we heard about from our participants here. Just remember that when your children, if you're naming children, for example, they have to take it out in a 10-year period. You no longer can stretch it. You used to be able to, let's name grandchildren, and they won't forget Uncle Sam until who knows when. But now it's a 10-year stretch. And so, for example, my children are in their middle 40s, and if I should die, they would be receiving it now when they're in their higher earning years, and it probably another